separated by a row of mortar in between. So he says that applies when the mortar is pure mud, and that means it adheres better to the row of bricks. Aval berichsa boitve, but if the mortar is composed, if it's mixed in with pebbles as well as the mud, it doesn't stick as well. In that case, maybe it would be wider because you need more material. So therefore, we know that this only a pure mud that's inside. Ikadamri, others say, hani mili berichsa. Maybe what we're talking about here is a case where what it is in this mortar is the mortar mixed with stone, and it doesn't stick as well. Aval betina lo boy kulihai. But if it was completely mud, all mud, you wouldn't need such a wide thickness. So either way, basically, you need that thickness, and the question is whether it's because it's all mud and it sticks better, or because a wall that's going to be held up with this material that's mixed with stone and with mortar and with mud needs that thickness of a tefach in order to hold it together. So now the Gemara is going to talk about how is a wall built, and this is going to relate to how people build buildings today and how the Beis HaMikdash was built. It says Lememra the gazis the chol arba amos gova. So when you build a wall out of stones, these are the smooth stones, that every 4 amos of height, right? So if it's 6 feet high, roughly, so ihava pusya chamsha, then the wall itself has to be 5 tfachim thick, right? Then it would stand up. So it's telling you if you're going to build a wall out of stone, and if you're going to build it 4 amos high, which is basically 6 to 8 feet, you better make at least 5 tfachim, about 5 times 4, about 20 to 24 inches thick, a stone wall. Otherwise, it's not going to stand. It says ilo koi, and if not, it won't stand. So it says v'ha amatroxin. So now there's a special thing. It's called amatroxin, and that is the wall that separated the Kodesh HaKadoshim, the Holy of Holies, and the Heichal, which is the room outside of that, inside the temple. And now we're gonna look now in Rashi and in Tosfos to see what is this amatroxin. What does it really mean? So if you take a look on your handout, the green, there's a little green highlighted space there. Okay, that's Rashi. You see that? Okay, so Rashi says, "V'ha amatroxin." What is amatroxin? What does it mean? He says the binyan Shlomo. So the building that Shlomo built, the gazis hava, it was made out of these smooth stones. Diksiv, because it says avnei gazis, because it says in the Navi, in the pasuk, it says it was built out of gazis. V'have shloshim ama komasa, and it was 30 amos high. Okay. Ve'ein ovav ela ama, and the thickness of it is only 1 amma. Lahavdil bein ha'heichel ha'kodesh kadoshim, because the dimensions are specified. So that wall separating the Kodesh HaKadoshim and basically the rest of the temple was 1 amma thick. Okay, so and it was 30 amos high. So that means you had a ratio of 1 to 30. Okay, so says Rashi. Now we take a look at Tosfos. That's on the left side of the page, the orange one. See that? It says Troxin. What is that? Omer Rabbeinu Tam, who's the author of this particular Tosfos, says the Trakhavi. It was an enclosure. That's what. So this word Troxin, it's not a Hebrew word. It's a contraction of 2 words. It's Trak and Sinai. So it's Trak means something it's closing or enclosing, and Sinai is like Har Sinai. So he says the Trakhavi. It closed it off. Kamo Truke Gali Barachos. So just like the word is used in another Gemara that it's called truk. V'sin havi Sinai, and it's from Sinai. It's kolomar shehaya mafsik v'soger es haluchos shenisnu b'Sinai. So what it's saying to you is this trak, it's enclosing Sinai, and the luchos, the tablets that were given on Har Sinai, that's what's being enclosed. So that's where this word troxin is to let you know that what it's doing is enclosing. This is a wall. It's an amma thick, right? and it's enclosing the luchos that are inside the Holy of Holies. And those luchos were given on Sinai. Okay, so this is Rashi's comment and Tosfos' comment as well. And it says that it's v'soger es haluchos she'nasnu b'Sinai that were given in Sinai, shahayu menachos ba'aron shahayu b'beis kodesh kadoshim, that they were inside the aron, inside the ark, the box that was in the base kodesh kadoshim. Okay, so now continuing on with the Gemara. So, and this thing it was 30 amos high. The havi kavod tlosin amasa was 30 amos high. V'lo haya pusya elashit puchshe, and it was only 6 amos thick, right? V'kam, and yet it stood. So we just said 6 tefachim, right? Sorry. So we said that if you want to have a wall that's going to be 4 amos high, it needs to be 5 tefachim thick. So here we're saying that this wall that was in the base of Mikdash was 30 amos high, and it was only 6 tefachim thick. So how did it manage to stand? Right? The Gemara is saying, telling you that you want to build it this high, you better build it this thick. So the Gemara answers, it says that there's really no such rule. There's no ratio like that. It says kivan ika tefach yisera, since it was an extra tefach thick, it was 6 tefachim high, koi, it would stand. So it was strong enough that by making this 6 tefachim thick, even though it was higher than 4 amos, it still was gonna stand. So u'emikdash sheni, my time lo ovid amatraxin. So this amatraxin, this wall existed only in the first temple. You did not have such a wall in the second temple. In the second temple, the Kodesh HaKadoshim was separated from the Heichal, or from the rest of the temple, but not by a wall. It had curtains. It had a parochas. Actually, there were 2, and the way that they were set up, they overlapped, because you couldn't. This curtain was very big and very thick. You couldn't move it, so you couldn't set it up that you could walk through, because you were not allowed to look into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So the Kohen, the regular Kohen, who went into the Heichal where the golden Mizbeach stood, the golden altar was there. So he brought the Ketoris in there. He couldn't look into the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So if the curtains were open like that, you couldn't. So what they did, they made 2 curtains and they overlapped. So when the Kohen Gadol went in there on Yom Kippur, he would walk the length of the one curtain, and he would turn and go around and go inside. So, but the point is that there was no such thing as this wall in the second temple. So the Gemara is asking why wasn't it there? Why didn't have such a thing? So he says because he says ki koi b'tlosan koi. So it was 6 tefachim thick, right? And it was 30 amos high, tvelo koi. So yeah, you could make it. You don't have to make it so hugely thick, but if you wanted to stand, so 6 tefachim would hold up or would support a wall 30 amos high. If it was higher than 30 amos, it wasn't going to work. And the second temple, the walls were higher than in the first temple. So if you had it more than 30 amos, it would not stand. So therefore, it wouldn't work. So then the Gemara says, how do we know? Right? Again, how do we know? That they're telling you that they couldn't build a wall because it wouldn't be able to support the weight. And don't forget, the thickness of the wall was specified, right? Because the dimensions of the temple were set. So that wall, or that separation between the Kodesh HaKadoshim and the Heichal had to be no thicker than an amma. So now, if you're going to build a wall that's going to be more than 30 amos high, you have to build it thicker, but you can't build it thicker because you're limited in the dimension. So the Gemara says, well, how do you know? How do you know that it was taller than the wall that was in the first temple? It's because the ksiv, because it says in the pasuk, which is in the Navi, the prophet Haggai, who's describing it, he says, "Gadol yiheh kavod habayis hazeh ha'achron min harishon," that the honor or the kavod of this second one, the later temple, is greater than the first one. Let you know that in some ways it was more majestic, the second temple, than the first temple, which means Rav Shmuel v'Amri le Rav Yochanan v'Rabbi Eliezer, and Rav Shmuel, and some say Rabbi Eliezer said it, Rav Yochanan said that it means Chad Amar B'Binyan, one says it's superior in the building itself, and V'chad Amar, and the other one says B'Shanim, that it was longer in years. In other words, the first temple was in existence 410 years, and the second temple was up for 420 years. So we're saying that the honor of the second temple was greater than the first. So it's one says it's because it was built in a more majestic style, and the other one says because it lasted longer. So it seems like there is a difference of opinion now what the words really mean. It says, and the Gemara answers v'isa laha v'isa laha, and they're both true. That it was the second temple was a more magnificent structure, and it stood longer than the first temple. So the Gemara is still not happy because, okay, you're going to say that you can build this wall an amma thick, it can stand 30 amos high. So let's do it this way. Ne'avdu tulasin amin b'vinyan. So let's make it 30 amos of stone, right? V'idach neva parochas, and the rest we'll just put a curtain. Did I lose you in this space? I'm on the next page. Right, we're on Gimel Amud Beis 3b. Right, we're on the second line. Sorry, I'm just going. Okay, so we're on the second line of Gimel Amud Beis, and they say, well, if you're going to tell me that a wall can only be 1 amma thick, and we can only go as high as 30 amos, so let's build 30 amos of a stone wall, and then we'll put a curtain above that to whatever height. And there's a difference of opinion whether it was 40 or it was 100 high, but either way it's higher. So then let's just build it that way. So, and then the rest of it we'll make it with a curtain. So the Gemara says no, he says that won't work because kikoi tlasa namhasa, if it was 30 amos high and it stood, he says nami agav tikra maziva, because this was part of the building. So it was a wall that reached up to the roof. So you had the weight of the roof and the beams resting on that wall, and that's what allowed it to stand. But if you built it taller than that, or if you built it even to that height, and you didn't have the weight of the roof resting on it, it could still fall down. So it wasn't going to work. There was no way that you could do it. So you had to do it basically with the curtains. It says, below tikra maziva lo havakai. It would not stand if not for the fact that the roof was resting on it. Okay, so now it says levid mar mad efshir bevinyan, levid idach parochas. So then why? Okay, so that if 30 won't stand, maybe 20 would stand. So why not do that? Maybe build as much as you can out of stone, and build the rest with a curtain. So Amar Abaye, says Gemiri, they learned that the partition had to be ikula bebinyan, ikula beparochas. It had to be either completely stone, like in the first temple, or completely curtain, like in the second temple. And it couldn't be one or the other, or part one and part the other, because in the Mishkan, when they built the Mishkan, it says ikula bebinyan memikdash. If you're going to say they built the whole thing like that in the temple, ikula beparochas, or it was going to be completely as a curtain. They learned it from the Mishkan, because in the Mishkan it says that the entire thing was built as a curtain, and therefore, just as in the Mishkan that was built in the desert, the entire wall, because they did have walls, but the entire separation was curtain. So too in the temple, it had to either be made out of solid material like stone, or it be completely curtain. So Ibayalu. So the question was asked, Hain v'sidan. So how about the thickness of the wall? Does that include the wall and the plaster? Because when they built these stone walls, they would plaster the outside of it, so they make it smooth outside, just like in our buildings. There's stucco on the outside, so it made it look smoother, or maybe it even strengthened it. So do we include that thickness? So when we're talking about these walls that are separating courtyards from people's property, and we specify the thickness, is that including the plaster on the outside of the stone, or not? So Omar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, he says, Mistabra Haim V'Sidon. He says, it makes sense to me that it had to be the wall including the plaster, because the Isal Kadaitach Haim below Sidon, if you're going to say that this thickness of the wall is the wall without the plaster, right? So Lisnei Lishiure, so let him just teach that, when he lists the measurement, specify that it includes plaster. So since he's not saying that, Elalav Shmamino Haim Besidon. So then it must mean that you can't learn from it that the wall is the wall plus the plaster. It's got to be including the plaster. So the Gemara says, no, they're not accepting this. He's Olam Eimaloch Haim below Sidon. So maybe this measurement is the wall itself plus the plaster, right? V'kivan de lo havi tefach, and since the thickness of the plaster is such a thin amount, it's not even on both sides, not reaching to a tefach, they don't bother to mention it because it's a small amount. So, but we know lo tani, and therefore the Mishnah didn't mention it because it was less than a tefach. But the Gemara says that's not a good argument because v'hakatani bileveinin zeh nosein tefach mechza v'zeh nosein tefach mechza. So when it comes to the brick wall, remember we said it was three tefachim wide. Each one gave a tefach and a half, which means we do consider something that's less than a tefach as a significant amount. So maybe we're in this case where they're talking about the plaster, that measurement should be included, right? So the Gemara answers is Hasam Chaziletz Terufe. So there, because the two halves join together to make a full tefach, which is a significant number, where the plaster that's so thin, it's not going to constitute very much at all. So now we're going to still talk about the width and the size. It says Tashma Hakora, this beam that they're talking about. The thickness of the beam, right? That was talking about the one that's resting on top of the wall. He said that this beam that they're talking about, rachva kedei lakabel ariach. It has to be wide enough to accommodate a half-size brick. Va'ariach chatzi levena shel shlosha tefachim. And a half-size brick is half as wide as a full-size brick, which is 3 tefachim wide. Therefore, since the beam is going to be thick enough for one and a half, so it must not include the plaster. So they're going back and forth as to whether the plaster is included and so on, and we're going to get to a point in a minute. He says Hasam Baravarava. So that talks about the large bricks, which are 3 tefachim wide without the plaster. Dekanami, and also you can learn from this that the katani shel shlosha tefachim, that it has to be a brick of 3 tefachim wide, and michlal deika zutra, because there are some that are smaller. So that's why when the Mishnah is saying to you that they're specifying the bricks are 3 tefachim wide, it's to let you know that's the one they're using, not the smaller ones. Shmamina, and the Gemara says, so too we can learn. That, so basically it's letting us know that the types of bricks that were used are bricks that were 3 tefachim wide themselves, and if there was plaster, that measurement of the plaster did not really count. Okay, so now we're gonna get into a situation that applies to us right here in Boca Raton, actually. Okay, so Amar Rav Chisda says, Lo lister inish bekanishta, you cannot tear down a shul. So let's say you have a situation where you've outgrown your shul, right? The shul is too small, and now you need to build a bigger one. So you're not allowed to tear down the first one, right? Until you built the second one. So in other words, if you have a situation where your shul is too small, you need to do something, you need to build a new one. So you can't tear down the first one until the second one is ready. Right? So why? He says, Ika to Amri Mishum Shiyusa. So some say it's because they might just not build the second one. Right? So they tear down the first one, and now, maybe for whatever reason, they don't build the second one. Now you have a community left without a shul. So, what? Can't get a loan from the bank. Maybe they had, and we're going to find out that there could be different purposes that money could have been used for. Maybe they had the money, maybe they didn't have the money, but they tore down the building, and now here's this group with no place to daven, and they're not building the new one. Or Ikat Amri, there's also could be Mishum Taluye, or because they not only is it the fact that they would not necessarily build, but what do you do in the meantime, right? Even if you are going to build a new one, you've torn down the old one. It takes time to build a new one, so there's no place for the people to go and daven during that intervening time. So the Gemara says, so my benayu. So we have two different opinions as to why you don't tear down a shul until the new shul is ready. So what's the difference between these two opinions? He said, Ika benayu. The difference is the Ika dukta de saluye. The difference is if there's a different place that they can use. So in other words, if there's a second place that they can use, then the second answer doesn't apply because they can. But the first statement that they still might not build it, so maybe you can rent a room in the high school or something, right? Like people do. But so then you could use that. But then you might not go ahead and build the new building. So the first answer says you shouldn't tear it down because you might not build it. So that answer still holds. So you have a situation that we're going to come to right now. Mereimar Umar Zutra, Sasri Yavonu Be Kaita Besifta. So you had a situation where you had a community, not quite like ours, because we don't really have a summer and a winter, right? But there are some places where it's hot in the summer and it's cold in the winter. They didn't have air conditioning, and central heating like we do. So they had two buildings actually. They had one for the summer and one for the winter. And if you take a look in the Rashi, that is I've got a pink highlight over there. Do you see that? See that, the pink highlight? Okay. And so Rashi says, Be kaita besifta. So in other words, they're tearing down the summer shul in the wintertime. Because Beis HaKnesses Hoya Lahem, Limosa Choref, they had a shul for the winter, right? It was Nomach B'Ksalim Rechavim, the walls were low and they were thick. V'chalonos Mu'atim, and small windows. B'nei Hatzina, because it was cold. B'Yomos Achama, in the summertime, Beis HaKnesses Acher, they had a different shul, Sha'ave Sholotbo, that it was a lot of fresh air going through. So they had two different buildings. One was for the winter and one for the summer. So they say it's okay to tear down in the summertime. You can tear down the one for the winter because you have enough time to rebuild it. And conversely, if it's winter time and you want to rebuild the summer one, you can tear down the summer. We're in the winter, you can tear down the summer one. So because you still have a place that you can daven. So Amar le Ravina Ravashi. So Ravina has said to Ravashi, Govu Zuze Umechase. So suppose they collected the money to build, right? Like what we're trying to do now, to collect the money for the new building, and they deposited the money. They said they held it in the treasury of the shul. What's the din? What's the rule then? Because the first answer they said why you should not tear down a shul until you got a new one ready is because maybe you won't go ahead and do it. But suppose you collected all the money, right? What's the main concern, right? Is that you're not going to have the money to build the shul, right? Everybody's concerned, right, that you don't have the money. So suppose we have the money. Would that be okay in that case to tear down the shul because we have the money to build a new one? So he says, Amar Le. So Rav Ashi responded to Ravina. He said, Dilma misrame lahu pidyon shvuyim. So just like today, maybe more so than today, there was a problem with kidnappings, right? And we see, the Arabs are always very happy if they can cross the border and kidnap an Israeli soldier, and it's always a big problem to ransom that soldier. And what are they going to do? Because they want 1,000 Arabs for one Jew. But anyway, so the situation was that they always had to have money on hand just in case people were kidnapped, and they had to ransom them. So suppose you had this money that you had set aside to build the shul, and another problem came up. There was a kidnapping, or more than one kidnapping, and now the kidnappers are demanding the money, and you had the money you had set aside for the shul, so what are you going to do? V'yavaluhu, and you have to give the money to the kidnappers. So now again, you tore down your building, and you have no money, right? So they say, better not to do it. It says, so they say, well, suppose we're not just going to stockpile the money. He says, Serige livne v'hadre hurde u'mechase b'shure. So suppose we buy all the materials, and we stockpile all the materials, we're ready to build now. How about then? Could we tear down the building then? We're not going to worry about not holding the money, but we have all the materials ready to build the new building, and could we tear down the old one at this point? So Amalei Rav Ashi is still not happy. He says, Zimnin de Misramelu Pidyon Shvuyim. So suppose the same situation came up. You could sell the bricks and the stones and the beams and everything else. You could sell them to raise the money. So it won't help you if you have the building materials together. Again, you shouldn't just tear down the shul because you have the building materials, because those building materials can be sold, and then that money will be used for ransom. And again, you're stuck with no building for your shul. So Ravina goes back to Rav Ashi and he says, if so, if you're going to go that far to say that even the building materials could be sold, afilu banu nami. Even if they built the whole building, maybe you could sell the building for that purpose. And then so now you're stuck as well. So they say the answer is Amalei. Rav Ashi says to Ravina, Dir say the inshe lo mezavne. People don't sell their house. So just like you wouldn't necessarily sell your house for a ransom, people don't sell the shul for a ransom. So in that case, if the new building is built, so it's no problem to demolish the old building, because you're gonna have this the second. They're not going to use the other building to ransom it. So, and there's one other exception. It says v'lo amron ella delo chazi beit yucha, and this idea that you can't tear down the building until you have a new building ready. That's only if the old building was in good condition. But if the old building is in bad condition, it's in bad shape, and there are cracks in the walls, and it's in danger of falling down. So if it's a safety issue, which maybe we could extend to our situation here, we're talking about building a new building because what we have here in certain situations may not be safe. So they say if it's not safe, in that case, you could certainly tear down the building to build a new one. Aval chazi beit yucha, but if you see the cracks and it's in danger of falling down, in that case, sasra even you could tear down the old one and build a new one. He says kihad Rav Ashi. Rav Ashi says chaza ba tiyucha. He saw cracks b'knishna de Masa Machasya. So Rav Ashi was in the town of Masa Machasya, and he saw the walls of the shul were cracked, and he felt that it was not safe for people to go in there and daven there. He says right away, sasre, he tore it down, and then afterwards, vaya lepuri lahasam. And then, in order to make sure that they would build a new one, he brought his bed to the construction site so he could watch what was going on. And he didn't move until they already built the roof and they put the gutters on it, so he knew that shul was gonna be happening. So, next case we're going to talk about Herod Hordus, and how we know that when he built the second base of Mikdash was built, right, and then Hordus tore it down. Herod tore it down and he built a new temple. So the question is, how was he able to do that? We just said you can't tear down one building until you have a new building. So how did Herod do it? We're going to find out next week how Herod actually did it.